He was a co-founder of the Western Heritage Festival, which was dedicated to the Western way of life. He was a board member for the South Dakota Historical Society Foundation, and he wrote columns for the Pierre Capital Journal telling about his life. And he is now going to share how that came about and some of his columns. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Dorinda. I appreciate that. And before we get started, I want to also thank the South Dakota Historical Society Foundation for allowing us to do this. I have no really agenda tonight, so I thought maybe I would give you a little bit of my background that might help you understand where some of these stories came from. I'm 74 years old. I've lived all but 4 of those years in Hughes County. And a good share of those years, probably 40 of them, in Harrold, South Dakota. So that's about as flat a prairie in Harrold as you can find. And the stories that I wrote as a young, telling of my younger years when I was in school, grade school and high school in Harrold, are all vivid memories to me of that little town, which was my world at that time. It was really neat to grow up in a little town like that. It was a Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn type of a bringing up. My first memories that are written about in these articles is living in Colorado. We moved to Colorado when I was 3 years old, and my dad went to college there, and Fort Collins, Colorado A&M, and then he went to work on a ranch down by Evergreen. It was Evans Ranch, which was owned by the family whose ancestor had been governor and who Mount Evans was named after. Those were some of my first vivid memories, and we may read a story about that tonight, because those are very vivid memories to me. Growing up in Harrold, it seemed like every day there was an adventure of some kind that we kids could have, and some of them got us into trouble, and some were just a lot of fun. But I went back to Harrold when I graduated from high school. My dad wanted me to be a vet, and for some reason I got really close to the English teacher in Harrold, and he opened my eyes up to things that I really enjoyed, literature and writing. And I just made up my mind that that was what I was going to do, is to be an English teacher. I got to college, and my counselor told me I was the only person on record from Harrold, South Dakota that wanted to teach English. So I didn't know if that was good or not. But the first lesson I had in writing really came from a college professor. And the one rule that he gave to me, drilled into me, was that communication, whether it's writing or whether it's listening, only is accomplished if the person who is receiving that message fully understands what you're saying. So writing is not a craft of assumption. You have to approach with a mindset that this person may not know anything about what you're writing about. So you have to be able to explain it as fully and completely as you can, so that you're answering questions that they may have at some point. That was one of the first items that my first priorities as an English teacher, because I went back to Harrold and taught for 9 years, taught high school English, freshmen through seniors. And one of my first priorities was to teach writing and to teach it as a communication tool, and to stress the fact that clear writing isn't something that is done quickly. Thomas Jefferson, after writing a long letter to one of his friends, apologized at the end of it. He says, "I'm sorry for such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." So that's kind of what the craft of writing, in my mind, really amounts to, is to say what you need to say as completely as you can in as few words as you can. And that's when I first started writing these stories. I had been out of practice writing for a long time. So the first dozen or so, I spent hours editing my work. I'd write it, lay it down, come back to it, and it was always getting shorter. It was never getting longer. It was always getting, 2 words were being replaced by 1 word, and or a word is being replaced by a better word. And it was a reawakening of a habit that I used to have. After a while, it got to be second nature, and writing was then a conversation that I was having with somebody. It was something that I would be speaking as well as writing. One of the reasons I love to write these stories, these memories, because as a youngster, the Heintz family, my dad's family, there was 9 brothers and sisters. They would come home at Christmas time, all 9 of them. And my grandma's living room was not as big as this front area up here. But they would all be crammed in there, and all we kids would be sitting on the floor, and we'd be listening to them. And they would be telling stories of their life, of their growing up, and of their escapades, and laughing and just really having a good time. And we kids look forward to that every year. That was something that was really special. It was almost as good as getting presents, is to sit and listen to those people talk. My first real writing that was ever published was the Harrold Centennial book. That was in 1986. It was a project that we had a year to do it in. I wrote the history, which is about half of the book. We started out, the only thing that we had was a little picture of the main street. You couldn't identify anything on the picture, just the fact that there was a name on the back of it, that it was Harrold. And by the time we were done, we had more pictures than we could use. And families were sending in their family histories, and it was fun to read those family histories. And that made me realize even more that maybe writing stories about family, about our memories, would be something that would be interesting to our kids or to other people. And my dad wrote a long autobiography, which I still have, and which I go back and read every once in a while. It talks about his years in the Navy and growing up in Harrold. Lived in Harrold also. The place for my writing for this column, by the way, this column's title was Dakota Retrospect. It wasn't under Prairie Memories. It was under Dakota Retrospect. My first thing that got me on the path to writing was the beginning of the Dakota Western Heritage Festival. If I can find it here. Oh, I have it marked. But at that festival, we had a chance to meet Johan Hollenbeck. And Johan Hollenbeck was a cowboy poet. And we talked to her for a long time over at the pizza Pizza Ranch. And she told about all the different gatherings, the cowboy poetry gatherings that she went to. And I said, why don't we do that here? And she said, nobody's tried. So we tried. And that turned into a 9-year run for us. We shut it down simply because there wasn't anybody that was going to be available that was going to carry it on for us. And between the two of us, between me and Carmen, we were both had other things in personal lives that was going to keep us busy. But oh, here it is. See if I can read. My one big fear tonight was my voice. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah. Put the mic a bit closer. Put the mic a bit closer. Microwave.
I wish it would extend a little more. This kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of how the festival started. And it will lead right into how the writing of the stories began. Funny how things work out. In the end, it seems like it was meant to be. Patty loves going to Pizza Ranch. The chicken is our favorite, but Patty really goes there for the cactus bread dessert. That was a problem 7 years ago, about this time in the fall. We had filled up on the chicken, the potatoes, salad, and planned on topping it off with dessert. I got several pieces of cherry and peach dessert pizza with ice cream on top, but Patty's favorite cactus bread was gone. We sat back down and I leisurely ate my dessert, apologizing for eating in front of her, but my ice cream was melting. She didn't mind just as long as she had cactus bread in the near future. She checked the trays again, still no cactus bread. Knowing Patty, I knew we weren't leaving without her having some. We waited for a quarter of an hour, continually eyeing the dessert counter, when I noticed a big Lincoln pull up into the parking lot. I pointed it out to Patty, and as she looked at the car, she recognized the lady getting out of it. That's Yvonne Hollenbeck. She's a quilter. Of course she knew who she was. She was a quilter. When Yvonne and her friend came in, she came over to say hi to Patty. And Patty introduced Yvonne to me. Yvonne said she and Jean Prescott were returning from a small cowboy poetry and music gathering in Mobridge and had stopped for supper before driving home. After she sat down, Patty checked the dessert tray. No cactus bread. My curiosity up, I visited with Yvonne, asking her what a cowboy poetry gathering was. She explained the history, beginning with a few cowboys getting together in Elko, Nevada in the middle of the wintertime, passing time away, telling stories, singing songs, and reciting poetry. Much of it personal about their lives as cowboys and regaling the cowboy way of life. The gathering became an annual event, soon drawing cowboys from all over, with other gatherings springing up in Utah, Texas, Wyoming, and over 20 years throughout most of the West. But, she said, there isn't one held yearly in South Dakota. I asked her why. She said, I guess just because no one's ever done it. By the way, still no cactus bread. It just so happened I was going to Tombstone for a Don Edwards concert in a few weeks. And finding Yvonne and Jean were good friends with Don, I asked, kind of tongue-in-cheek, whether they thought he would come to Fort Pierre to do a concert. They said he sure might, being Casey Tibbs was one of his heroes. I got excited. First, because of the thought of Don performing here, and second, the cactus bread finally showed up. I continued talking while Patty was eating, and by the time she was done, the germ of an idea was growing in my mind. If Yvonne would give me direction and advice, I would explore putting on a cowboy poetry and music gathering in Fort Pierre. The rest, as they say, is history. The point of this story is that some things are just meant to be. If Patty and I hadn't decided to go to the Pizza Ranch that night, if we hadn't waited for the cactus bread, if Yvonne and Jean hadn't stopped, here's a mistake I made. We stopped at Perkins. We weren't at Perkins, we were at Pizza Oh, I'm sorry, let me read it again. If Yvonne and Jean had stopped at Perkins instead of coming to the ranch, if Patty and Yvonne weren't both quilters, if Yvonne and I weren't both talkers, if we didn't have the same love and interest in the West and its traditions, if Casey Tibbs wasn't a big hero of Don Edwards, if Carmen Cowan McGee hadn't come to a meeting in fall in January offering her support when no one else did, and I could go on and on, the Dakota Western Heritage Festival would have never happened. We talk about this often and have come to one logical conclusion. We're sure glad Patty loves the cactus bread. Well, when we were struggling to begin the festival, we enlisted Lance Nixon, who was the editor of Capital Journal at that time. And it just so happens he was a history nut. He did a lot of historical research and writing. And as we talked, he became aware of my interest in writing and my background a little bit. And he asked me if I would write, if I'd do some historical writing. And I said, I would love to, but I really don't think I could, that I've got the time to do the research. I said, I'll tell you what I would like to do is write about some of my memories growing up in Harrold, South Dakota. And he said, okay, that sounds good. We'll run it for a week or two and see what happens. He said 500 or 600 words. Well, that's 500 or 600 words. So that got to be a habit for me. But anyway, the first one that I wrote was about Halloween when I was in the third grade. So it was a vivid memory that is in the book. Next one I wrote, I got kind of carried away. I wrote about a trip to Florida, which is where my mom was from. And it was a good story, but it was about 800 words long. So I got the fingers shook at me for doing that. So after that, it got to be a habit that typing on a computer, by the time I got to the bottom of the page, I had my 500 words. And it got to be a little psychosomatic, I guess, that I could sense when I was getting to the end of the page, getting to the end of my 500 or 600 words, and that I was able to round out the story and finish within that period of time, which I couldn't explain. Lance asked me, how do you do that? I thought, well, he's a writer, he should know how to control his word count. But anyway, the writing craft that I had learned in college of making the writing as clear as possible in as few words as possible, choosing the right words, eliminating excess words. That was a tough thing. It was a time-consuming thing for me to do, to be able to reread the story and realize that, gee, it didn't sound right. I would read it out loud in my mind, like someone was reading it to me, and if it didn't sound right, I knew there was something there that didn't fit, that needed to be changed. And so that was kind of the challenge that I had when I first began to write. Somebody asked me, how do you remember all those things? I'm at a loss. All I can say is, how can you not remember those things? I mean, some of the memories that I have as a youngster, either exciting or traumatic, or sad, or they're right there. They haven't changed over the years. That memory is still the same as it was 30 years ago for me. One of the goals that I had in writing, besides doing the articles this way, was how many of you do genealogy or have an interest in it? How many of you know who your grandparents were? What they did for a living? Anything about their daily life? Color of their hair? Anything? Do you ever think about that? Is that ever something you would like to know something about? Well, I'm sure we've all had an occasion when our parents or relatives or somebody has talked about their growing up and stuff. And it's interesting. It's fun to hear. And unless it gets written down, it's going to disappear, is what it amounts to. So I have been keeping journals for quite some time. Not always faithful in keeping it, but a daily journal. I kind of struggle sometimes to find something to write on a daily basis. So I thought maybe these stories, to me, maybe my purpose in writing these stories should be to leave something to my kids, so that as after I'm gone, they'll be able to turn to this book and learn something about me, something about how I grew up, some of the things on a daily basis that interested me or got me into trouble or was lots of fun, a big event, those kinds of things. So the writing, to me, was probably the priority became writing it for my kids, and having it in the paper was secondary. I have been amazed over the years. We came out of Pizza Ranch one night, and a gentleman followed us out, and he said, "Are you the guy that writes those stories?" And I turned around, I had no idea who he was. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, keep it up." And then he walked away. But I still run into that. People recognize my name, I guess, and talk about the stories, how they enjoy it. And there was a lot of people that said, "You need to write a book." Well, I decided after I quit writing the column that it was a good time to put the stories into a book form. And I didn't realize it at the time. And I'm not sure of the count, but it was 172 pages. So that's 3.5 years of writing that I did on a weekly basis. I don't know that I missed more than 2 weeks during that whole time. But I would challenge you to think back, pick a time in your life as a youngster that you really enjoyed, and think about what you did and who you were with and what you did for fun. You know, what did you go on a vacation? Did you were on a baseball team? Or like me, did you have a pony that you could ride all summer? I didn't have a bike, but I had a pony, so that was my summer of transportation when I was in the 3rd grade. Those memories, I think, with practice, just like in writing, with practice, those memories will come back. And I challenge you, I don't care if you think you can write or not, I challenge you to write those things down and do it someplace that's going to be permanent, that you can give to your kids. And they're not going to care whether you're a good writer or not. They're going to be reading stories about you when you're long gone that they can read to their children, and their children can read to their children. And you're going to be more than a name on a tombstone. You're going to be more than a name on a genealogy list. You're going to be somebody that's flesh and blood and filled out and colorful, and your personality is going to be there too. So that's my challenge to you folks. Any questions before we do some more reading? I wrote about a lot of things that were fun, a lot of things that were happy. There's one story here that was hard to write from an emotional standpoint. When I was in the 3rd grade, my dad he did leather work, and he made 2 leather belts, tooled leather belts, for the school superintendent in trade for an Irish setter pup. So I had this Irish setter pup, which my dad, for some reason, decided we need to name Mike. Good Irish name, right? Mike. Trouble was, I had a cousin whose name was Mike too. He lived right down the street. So here we had 2 Mikes. One was a dog and one was my cousin. But I wrote 3 different stories about that dog when he was a pup growing up, some of his antics over the years, and then the last one, in his last year of life. And I think this is something that resonates with a lot of people. I hope it does, because it sure did as I wrote it for myself. I knew this day was coming and had tried to steel myself for its arrival. Our Irish setter, Mike, was getting along in dog years, but had been healthy up until that hot July day when he was sleeping in the shade of my uncle's car. By the time he heard the engine start, it was too late. Unknowingly, my uncle backed over Mike's jaw and throat, causing the dog to lose his hearing and to struggle to eat or drink. He would lap water, never being satisfied, and eating was exhausting for him. He was in pain, suddenly old, and failing fast. I gently picked Mike up, loaded him into the bed of my pickup that Saturday morning, opening the windows on the top before closing the door. Mike laid down on the rug Debbie had spread out for him. She and I climbed in the pickup cab and started a slow journey to Dr. Autry, the vet in Highmore. I don't think we talked at all, both of us lost in memories of our friend Mike. I remember Dad purchasing the Irish setter pup with 2 handmade Western belts. And how Mike licked my face when I carried him home, and the fun we had the winter Dad made a harness for him. And he pulled my sled up and down the icy streets. I smiled, remembering climbing a ladder onto the flat roof of Harrold's old 3-cell jail, turning around to find Mike standing behind me, wagging his tail. I was worried about how I would get him down the rickety ladder. No problem, he just jumped off the roof. He did it over and over again that summer. He attended church one Sunday, sneaking in the open door of a hot morning, finding Dad and sitting down on the aisle beside him as the congregation rippled with laughter. School day mornings found him following me or Deb to school, watching until we were in the building before returning home. The first day of my freshman year, while I was sitting in the third story study hall, Mike peeked into the large room, spied me, and came happily trotting to my desk, much to everyone's amusement except mine. Students had to pet him as I took him down the 3 flights of stairs, lecturing him all the way. He was always there, waiting in the schoolyard for us to come out so he could walk home with us. I remember hunting with him, of him coming to a point, peeking sideways at me as if to say, I've done my job, now do yours. I was remembering him walking the aisle of Dad's store, greeting everyone who came in, and on sunny spring days lying in the middle of Harrold's wide Main Street, sound asleep as cars passed by him. Most of all, I remember him following the horses Dad and I would ride. Mike would range over the bluffs above the creek, nose to the ground, always out in front of us, finally flopping down in the water to cool off. He always looked like he was smiling. I know he was enjoying himself. We gave Mike one last hug and pat as Dr. Autry gave him the shot. He laid down and closed his eyes, and we wiped ours, all the while telling Mike how much we loved him. When it seemed Mike was gone, I went inside and paid the bill. Dr. Autry checked him one last time. Mike's old heart was still faintly beating. The vet gave him another shot. It was quiet in the pickup cab as we returned home with Mike's body in the pickup bed. We dug a grave in the backyard where it would be shady on hot summer days, and wrapped him in a rug he slept on, gently lowering him into the dirt. Deb made a marker for Mike. I hope to be reunited with Mike. I want to tell him again how much I love him. And if there is a just, eternal being, I will be able to do that. I know that when I catch sight of him, he'll be roaming the green bluffs above a cool creek and will joyfully come running when I call his name. Young, strong, his beautiful red coat reflecting the morning sunshine. I asked Carmen to do some reading for me. She said, I don't know if my voice is going to last. Is there something that you, one of those stories or one that you read that you'd like to read?
You just go along and I'll find. You keep doing what you're doing, Gary.
Okay.
Was third grade your kind of the one you always remember the most or something? I'm just curious.
I remember a lot about second grade. I was in Mobridge at the time, went to school there. But third grade seemed like where everything happened.
Well, I keep talking about stuff that I did in third grade.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah, kind of.
It's the best 3 years of your life, wasn't it?
One good thing, I did drive to school when I was in third grade by myself. That's one thing I talk about. You have a driver's license? You need it for those days.
I've had some people accuse me of stretching the truth, and Jerry's one of them.
It's true.
And my wife is another. So this is a story about once upon a time. Listening to my dad and his siblings tell stories was the highlight of my summers when I was growing up in Harrold. There were seldom any new stories, but the old ones seemed to get more detailed and more colorful with each passing year. I found myself silently repeating those stories, practicing my delivery, trying to improve on the color of each recitation. Storytelling throughout history has been a main source of entertainment in homes, at work, at school, wherever you were with a group of people that had time to kill. Trying to best your friends with a bit of story usually led to stretching the truth, adding facts that made the story more exciting and memorable. Tall tales like Paul Bunyan and Pecos Bill are classics. Now, I'm not saying that I've ever done that on purpose in my stories, but I'm giving a fair warning that this one has been stretched to the breaking point, both in facts and my wife's tolerance. In fact, it probably should be classified as a tall tale. My foot had been bothering me for quite some time, and after several unsuccessful attempts to find a cure, I went to a specialist in Rapid City. Patty rode along and was trying to decide whether to visit a quilt shop while I was at my doctor appointment or to accompany me to the clinic. She was ever grateful that she decided to go with me. The nurse positioned me on the exam table and invited Patty to sit down while we awaited the arrival of the doctor. Patty always has a book with her, and if she isn't engaged in conversation, she is reading, except for that day. There was a knock on the door, and this Greek god of a doctor in a doctor's coat came in. Tall, tanned, and chiseled.
That part of it's true.
Tall, tanned, and chiseled. Get that in your head. He began his examination of my foot, while I thought to myself, wow, what a good-looking man. I happened to glance over at Patty. She wasn't reading. I'm not sure she was breathing. Her eyes were glued to the doctor's tan face. As he visited with me about my foot, he noticed Patty's unwavering attention. And without skipping a beat, he moved the wastebasket in front of her so she wouldn't drool on the floor. He was unaffected by her adoration, apparently used to female attention. As we left the office, Patty was still swooning over the young doctor, telling me over and over again how good looking he was. I tried to ignore her, my self-image dented by her doctor worship. I stopped at the desk to pay the bill, and as I turned around to leave, I saw Patty talking to an elderly lady in a wheelchair. pleading with her to run the wheelchair over her foot so she could go back in. I finally heard her out the door and into the car, being careful to lock the door so she couldn't escape. I kept the car keys hidden for several days to be sure she didn't go back to Rapid City. Now, admittedly, I embellished the story, but the basis of it actually happened. For the reader or the listener of this kind of tale, deciding how much or how little of it is factual and how much of it is color is part of the enjoyment. Patty, by the way, thinks I have added all the color I'm going to and still have a home when my key fits the lock. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes,
The one I liked was your mom and dad's politics.
okay.
Go for it.
Wait a second. Do you want me? Card.
Did you have someone to edit or to read or to advise you after you wrote, or did you
Somebody
just?
who edited,
Yes.
my wife corrected it. She never changed any words, but she took a lot of time with punctuation and stuff. And she'd always find a word before I would send it in. She'd have to read it. We'd go through it. I find that editing is part of the fun. That going back and with semi-fresh eyes and looking at what you wrote and see where it could be better. And the satisfaction is when you finally read it and you can't find anything that you want to change. And that's basically what an editor does. You know, it's a third party, a third set of eyes, but you become your own editor. Simply, what I would do is I was reading it out loud in my head, so it sounded like someone was telling me the story. And by doing that, it was easy to spot weak areas that were mushy that needed to be shortened or changed. So, okay, Carmen's been doing some reading in the book, and she's got one that she really likes. So
I'll spare you voice a minute. I have to put my glasses on. Well, for those of you that don't know me, Paul McGee,
I'm
and
sorry, I should have introduced.
no, that's okay. And Gary and I did become very good friends. I like to tease him that one of my best friends is retired, insurance, salesman. I mean, isn't everybody? And I guess the thing when he started doing these, the stories and stuff is obviously getting to know him as an adult. It's like so cool to read these stories out of these visions, because a lot of my relatives are from the Harrold area and crossover, and it's like of this little mischievous redheaded boy, and the things that you could probably do in Harrold, South Dakota that you wouldn't have been able to do, right? And when I got my book out the other day, of course I've read a lot of these over and over, but one of them that just kind of stuck in my mind, because of everything that's going on in the world and just the way we don't always see eye to eye on things, but this story just really kind of tickled me. Mom and Dad's politics. This being the political season, I'm reminded of the time my dad's political enthusiasm almost gave my mom a heart attack. It was a tough time for our family. Money was short. Dad barbered in a small shop on East Dakota here in Pierre with Gib Hart and Art Boyle. Driving back and forth from Harrold 6 days a week in our worn out 1955 Studebaker. Dad's obsession with horses went without saying. And even though we struggled to pay the bills, Dad always had a horse. I know some other people like that, maybe. I was lucky enough and big enough to ride the flashy horse most days in the summer while Dad was in Pierre. Mom griped about the expense of keeping that horse, money that could pay for food instead of hay. So you can imagine how she reacted when she found out Dad had made a $100 bet with Jack Boning on the 1960 presidential election between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. That election caused tremendous excitement across the country, partly because of the first ever televised debates that gave people a glimpse into the two candidates. I don't remember my parents ever being political. So I'm guessing the bet was made on a Saturday night after Dad, Jack, Perky, and a few others had consumed a few beers. Several days later, when my mom found out my dad had bet $100 on Kennedy to win, she was ready to pack and go home to Florida. Dad's only defense weapon was to ignore Mom when she got mad, and he was pretty quiet around the house for the week before the election. Taking his time coming home to delay the cold shoulder treatment he knew he was going to get. I remember the night of the election, and even though Mom was mad, she couldn't resist watching our black and white TV past her normal bedtime. The next day was the worst of all because the winner was still not determined. And Mom's misery and Dad's seemed endless. Finally, when Kennedy was called the winner, Mom clapped and cheered and punched Dad on the arm for putting her through the whole ordeal. When Dad came home the next day after collecting his bet with Jack, he held the $100 bill above his head like a trophy. My parents grew up during the Depression, their families struggling to survive, and they always talked about Franklin Roosevelt with worship, respect. The WPA and the CCC programs gave their families opportunity to work and to put food on the family table. Being Democrats was part of their upbringing, especially my mom. Dad's politics changed slowly and had come full circle when he voted for Reagan. I never heard any words between my folks about their politics, but I'm sure they had some heated discussions because of Dad's going over to the enemy. The only thing I remember Mom saying was that Dad voted for Reagan because he rode a horse. As years went along, I used to tease them about their politics, telling them they canceled each other out when they voted. That roused Mom up, showing a side of her I rarely saw, one of unquestionable loyalty not to a person but to a party. It didn't matter who was running, she was voting Democrat. Dad seemed to hold his cards close to the vest, never saying much about who he favored in most elections. It was only times in conversation when he would voice a conservative opinion. Even though they canceled each other out in their votes, they took the privilege of voting seriously, considering it a duty as citizens of this country. I remember watching Mom vote at the old fire hall in Harrold, coming out behind the makeshift booth, carefully folding her ballot and slipping it into the ballot box. We all take history and government classes in school and hopefully learn why we are privileged to live in such a special country. But watching my mother cast her ballot had more impact on my sense of duty, appreciation for this country, with all its faults, than any classroom ever could. God bless you, Mom and Dad, and God bless America.
Questions? Any comments?
Did you write by hand or did you write
No.
with a computer or typewriter?
It's always on typewriter, always on a computer. And my handwriting has suffered over the years, and it's really bad now, so I wouldn't attempt to do that. When I wrote the history book for Harrold, it was all longhand, which was really, it's kind of a luxury if you want to be able to do that. So, and it's the fact that writing it on a typewriter, on the computer, I could just send it to the paper as is. They didn't have to do anything with it, they just printed it. So that was another reason why it was on the computer like that. Got time for a couple more that I would like to read. You can stand there, stand and listen. I had an aunt, Aunt Ella, who lived over in Harrold all her life. And after her husband died, she moved into an apartment house and lived there until she couldn't stay by herself, and then ended up in Mary House here. And at some point, we started taking Wednesday afternoons. I would run over there with the car and pick her up, and we'd just go out and start driving the country. Just go out on the country roads and just drive for a couple of hours. And became a pretty special time for me, and I know it was for her too. She would get herself all gussied up, just like she was going on a date when we'd leave. But this is called Wednesdays with Aunt Ella. Ella would be waiting by the back door of Mary House, gussied up, as they used to say, with her hair fixed and makeup on. Wednesday afternoons had become our time, when I would pick her up and we would go for an afternoon drive. We never had a particular destination, just to drive and talk. It was a special time for both of us. Aunt Ella was 90 years old and sharp as a pin. She was one of those people who accepted their circumstances and made the most of them. She did that when she moved into Mary House. I'm not sure how our Wednesday drive started, but I soon looked forward to those hours when a drive through the country reminded Ella of something in her life. What a wonderful storyteller she was. She would talk of homesteads long gone and forgotten, tell about the people who lived there. She would relate what the typical day was like on the farms when she was growing up, the hard work and the fun that they had in the small community of Harrold. She told of all the bustling businesses that used to line the main street. Marcel's Ford and Chevy dealership, Boning's and Hurlbert's grocery stores, Parker's drugstore, the Skyrocket dance hall where Lawrence Welk and his Hotsy Totsy boys played. The banks that went broke, the implement dealer and the blacksmith shop. She talked about driving to Pierre on the old Highway 14 that came into Pierre from the north past Grey Goose. I took it all in, reveling in all the first-hand history she remembered. I learned about my dad as a boy and a young man, of he and his brothers working in the CCC camps in the Black Hills, of his joining the Navy, traveling across the Pacific to Hawaii, sending souvenirs home to his sisters and sisters-in-law, of Mom living with Grandma Heintz when Dad took training in California, and of the parties the Heintz girls would have at Aunt Ella's house on Saturday nights, having bought a bucket of beer and sharing it through the night. She chuckled, remembering Grandma Heintz knocking on her door early one Sunday morning, there to collect Mom, taking her home to get ready for church. And Mom's head hurt so bad she could hardly walk a straight line. Those afternoons with Aunt Ella gave me much more than her memories of years past. They gave me a dear friend. Ella and I talked like old friends, sharing our own memories of people and places, connecting those memories with the common threads of family and the little town of Harrold. One fall Wednesday morning, Aunt Ella called, her voice a bit shaky, saying she had a touch of a cold and thought she better not go out that day. I sensed our Wednesday afternoon rides were over, that Ella was again accepting her circumstances, doing so with rock-solid faith in her life eternal. I visited Ella regularly after that, saddened to watch my aunt, my friend, grow weaker physically, her mind still sharp until the very end. When I get the chance, I like to go for an afternoon drive, nowhere in particular. I remember the Wednesday afternoons Aunt Ella and I became friends. And if there's no questions, we'll close with one more story. Unless Carmen's got another what she wants to start.
You're doing great.
Called roping practice. This is a memory that I don't think anybody can forget this memory. People could see me coming from 3 blocks away. I was an 8-year-old boy who always wore a cowboy hat and was swinging a rope, looking for something or someone to rope. Dogs hid, parked bikes and trucks were easy targets. Even little kids were not safe. Mom and Dad lectured me about roping people, but I didn't learn my lesson until that summer day in 1954. We still lived in the apartment behind Dad's barber shop, and I roamed the main street, roping benches, water fountains, car bumpers, anything that looked like a target. I had just stepped out of the barber shop when I spied Don, an older boy, riding towards me on his bike. I quickly stepped around the corner of the barber shop, built a loop, and waited. When Don coasted by, I swung my loop and let it fly. It was beautiful the way it sailed out. The first indication that something was wrong was when I realized that the rope had reached its entire length just as it settled over Don's head, closing around his jaw. I was so surprised I forgot to let go of the end of the spot cord rope. He came to a sudden halt, toppling off his bike. I was relieved to see he wasn't seriously hurt. That was obvious when he jumped up to his feet and came after me. Murder in his eyes. I took off down the street, away from the barber shop, and the safety of my dad, running as fast as my tennis shoes would carry me. Visions of being pounded and pummeled, then hung by my own rope, raced through my mind. I had to get back to Dad in safety. I slid to a stop, made a sharp turn, and headed back to the barber shop. Don tried to stop and turn too, but his cowboy boots slid on the gravel and he went down. I didn't look back until I was near the shop. Dad was standing on the step watching the chase. I hid behind him as Don caught up with me. Dad demanded to know what was going on, and Don told him of the wonderful loop that I had thrown. After finding out Don was not hurt, just mad, Dad turned to me and grabbed my arm, hauling me into the barber shop. He sat in the barber chair, threw me across his lap, and used the razor strap on my butt. After 6 or 7 wallops and a steady flow of tears, he lectured me in a calm voice, reminding me of the warnings he and Mom had given about roping people. I lost my roping privileges for a good part of the summer. Years later, I had a few goats that I would practice roping. They were good, cheap practice for my horse, teaching him to rein calf or steer. After a few runs, the goats knew enough to stop when they felt the rope and would stand quietly until you took the rope off them. One year, the goat herd included a billy goat. First few times I roped him, he strained at the end of the rope, somewhat like a calf. After that, roping him just made him mad. And when I stepped off my horse and started towards him, he would lower his head and charge me. I'd grab him by the horns and we'd have a pushing match until I got the rope off his neck. I didn't rope him very much that summer. He would see me enter the pen and would come after me. I don't think he liked being roped any more than Don did on his many years before. Thank you everybody for coming. If you're interested in a book, we've got some over here. I'll tell you, truth in advertising, the cost to me is $23. I'm charging $25 for it. So I'd rather have people have them and not make any money on them than not. So if you would be interested in the book, we've got some over on the table. So thanks again for coming. Thanks, Dorinda, for giving us the opportunity.